about a conversation we'll be having in studio, focusing on the issue of royalty payment to local artists, which is of course touched on by the president in his address yesterday, saying that this year they're targeting at least 2 billion shillings in terms of payment, which will be a significant increase from what was reported last year in 2019 by the government, which is just about 200 million shillings. And to have this conversation, I should be joined by, I am joined by Edward Sigei, who is executive director at Kikobo, which is the Kenya Copyright Board, as well as Anthony Osol, who is a music artist, and he'll also be joining the conversation. But let me start with Edward Sigei, and at least just to get a sense of what this actually means in terms of payments to local artists, because this is something which has been a matter of intense interest ever since this conversation was first had. I think it was around 2018. What are your immediate thoughts around the issue that the president mentioned yesterday in terms of payments?
Thank you very much, Julian. The president really was spot on this matter. And he made 4 interventions. The first one, of course, is transparency.
They're in the rundown, NTV Today.
Yes, can you hear me? Hello?
I can hear you. I can hear you.
Okay, I was saying the president addressed 4 issues. The first one is on transparency, with the launch of the system that would ensure that artists understand how much money has been collected and how much each one of them received, and they would be able now to get even a statement of their royalties paid. Secondly, address the issue about ensuring consistent funds goes to the artists, and this is through a number of measures. First is ensuring that the platforms and the CSPs and the are all working together towards ensuring that from the artists, for the artists are well protected and paid on time. The third one is on the issue of COVID-19, which is that funds will be made available for artists, that is 100 million, through the Ministry of Culture for the purposes of addressing their downturn, because artists have been out of business since February. For this purpose, the cabinet secretary from the Ministry of Culture will be addressing or issuing directives on how the money will be accessed and paid in due course. And the third one is immediately that the money that has been collected by CMOs from the first quarter, from January to end of March, will be paid as soon as possible. So I think it shows the concern of the government for the artists and knowing the role they play. And at this moment, they are being called upon immediately to cheer up the country and follow the instructions that will be issued by the Ministry of Culture to be able to, in exchange for their content, to access the monies that have been set aside immediately by the government of Kenya.
Once again, let me just hold you to that point and ask you, on January 14th, 2020, that is this year, the president gave a directive that all payment of royalties should be funneled into one account. How is this faring on 4 months later?
To have the joint account, yes, the joint account is open, and this is the account that will be paying the royalties due to the artists. Now, in addition to that joint account, there is a system that will ensure payments are made promptly and close to being automatic at the end of every month. So those measures have been put in place as we speak.
And one question before I bring in Antonio Sol into this conversation. We're talking about paying artists a cumulative payment of 200 million shillings per month. And around the place you can see businesses are closing down. Of course, clubs are closing down. So there isn't much of their music being played out there anyway. We're wondering, where exactly will these funds be coming from?
This is not money coming exclusively from the CMOs. It is the money coming from a number of platforms, including Skiza and even Viusasa. All this money will be accounted for through the system. So it's not really, there will be some money that will be collected even in these times of bad economic condition. But of course, it will have been affected by COVID. At the end of before COVID came in, the societies could collect over 40 to 50 million per month. With COVID, of course, this is probably now closer to a quarter of it. So we have taken cognizance of that. And this system that the president also mentioned would also incorporate certain interlinkages that would offer certain relief for artists. That is, this system would be connected into the NTSA system. It will be connected into the Communications Authority system to enable prompt payment at the point of licensing from those organizations, so that we stop having issues of non-compliance. At the moment, the compliance rate has been close to, even as I spoke of those amounts, the compliance rate has been close to about 20% cumulatively. And some media and other places has been close to zero. So we are working on all those areas. There are a number of initiatives to address compliance. We expect compliance even as we speak, and we also hope the corona period will be quick and short, so that we can get back to business.
Thank you very much, Edward Sige. And let me bring in Antonio Sol, who is a music artist, into this conversation. Anto, you are definitely one of the key beneficiaries of this sort of payment. And we just want to begin by understanding, what does the landscape look like as we speak in terms of business for you?
It's quite an interesting time to be a Kenyan artist, because with or without COVID, a lot of Kenyan artists are creating and really lighting up our homes and our, for those who are still working, people like Femi One and Major, the song Tawezana, definitely still lighting up people. So we have to continue working as a broadcaster on radio. I'm still on air every Monday to Friday with Obina, 4 to 8 p.m. So it's a challenging time, because then now I have to deal with artists who cannot be able to make it on air because of the restrictions that we have. But also, that said, my biggest challenge to Sige and generally to the joint board is most primarily about the 2017 tariff that was renegotiated for commercial stations, and of which I work for one, that is NTV. And it's really also a challenge to the media stations, because they reducted the tariffs that the media stations paid, and now they're paying close to nothing. And that makes me really wonder, how are they going to be able to come up with the 200 million shillings per month when already we're facing reduced tariffs, we have to deal with COVID, and if we're talking about 200 million shillings per month, what did Camp, Prisk, and MCSK collect in 2019 as a whole? And how do we project that figure is going to be able to be compensated per month? Because we're talking about 2019, probably 40 million a month. So it would take 5 months to be able to, to 1 month to achieve what was achieved in 2019 in 5 months. I'm finding that a bit quite difficult to, quite unattainable. Yet we have the issue of reduced tariffs, and generally bad business practices that affect people in the audiovisual industry.
But Anto, on that point, and if I could hold you onto it, the president argues that part of the key challenge that has been facing this industry in terms of royalty payments has been just the leakages. And that is why they came up with this issue of a single account to which all this is paid. Don't you think that is something that could give a relief going forward?
I think definitely with the leakages and the vacuum that has been placed there, one of the biggest vacuums is the reduction of tariffs. And I believe that by being open and transparent as to why stations that are primarily playing, over 70% of music, and that's mostly radio stations. I mean, why reduce tariffs on an area where you would actually earn more money for you to be able to to reach this figure that we're talking about. So, and the truth is that the media stations do place a figure and a quote for brands that want to come on board, informing them that they pay an 11% tariff. Well, it's actually been reduced to close to nothing, to close to 0.6 to 1% of their revenue. So, and the standard practice, Julians, in all over the world is between 10 to 11% of revenue. So if a company earns 1 billion shillings in revenue, they will pay 10% of that revenue to the music societies. So, and you know, to the CMOs. And so for that, I feel like, yes, we are placing the gap, but we also have to be at a place of information and knowledge that some of the steps that we've taken, especially in 2017 when they renegotiated the tariffs, that it's going to ultimately now affect the collection of the said royalties.
And one more question before I bring in Baxige. Some have argued that perhaps if persons hosting shows in local stations like yourself played more of local content, perhaps the payments could at least be more enhanced. How do you take this, considering you actually host a show here?
My show with Obina, and people should tune in 4 to 8 p.m. We play a lot of local music, and also, in fact, the top 7 at 7 countdown is primarily by local artists. In fact, people know the history with Nation FM, that we closed down 4 or 5 years ago, and when we were called by Obina to come back on air, one of our guidelines, one of the things that we insisted that had to happen for Obina and I to go back on air was that we had to have more local music playing on the station. Now, obviously from a policy point of view, I wouldn't know how much they pay. I don't know what the story is on that. But again, my challenge to every local station is that for us to be able to build capacity, for us to be able to stay sustainable, is that 1, we must play more local music, but also 2, we must also be honest with ourselves and accountable and open enough to actually pay the royalties that are owed to the CMOs. So it's also an issue, Julians, of Nation Media Group and the station on Mombasa Road and the other one on Dennis Street. It's a challenge to us that we need to pay those royalties.
Agreed. And let me bring in Sige just to respond quickly to one of the things you have mentioned there, which I think is really pertinent. The question of the tariffs and the tariff review in 2017. Once again, what's your response to this challenge which is being thrown to bodies such as yourself as Kekobo in terms of the tariffs being paid to artists?
Yes, the challenge with the tariffs was that many of the users did not agree with them, saying that they do not reflect the business reality. So the renegotiation was really about removing the tariff as a barrier to compliance for business people, and for the media, for the media, I don't know what's happening.
Yeah, we seem to be losing Bwana Sige there, who was giving us some insights in terms of the tariff payment. But let's cross over to the story on the late Archbishop Ndingi Mwananzeki, and I'm told his body has just arrived, and Kennedy Mureithi is on that story, giving us the latest update on that front. These are live pictures rather, which are showing us just the developments focusing on this matter. This is a big story today. We're looking at, this should be Holy Family Basilica, and we'll be going there live from 10 a.m. just to bring you the latest updates as to what is happening on the ground regarding the interment of the late Archbishop Ndingi Mwananzeki. And this is something which, of course, has a lot of interest in the country. Ndingi Mwananzeki was not only a man of the collar, but someone who championed for justice in Kenya. And his record is well known across the border to some of the issues he was agitating for in terms of liberties for the public, that rights and liberties should be respected, and that Kenyans should be given an open space to give their views, especially around the subject of democracy. And of course, he passed on at the age of 89, and certainly that is something we shall be following up for you. But getting back to our conversation on the issue of royalties, Bonasige, if you can hear me, we were discussing the issue of the tariff review. If you could just speak up from what you're saying.
I was saying the tariff became a barrier to compliance, and I said compliance was about less than 10% actually. So we want to put as many people as possible to allow them the opportunity to comply by having tariffs that are possible to pay within their economic status. And for that reason, the review was very, very critical. It's very key. Speaking to the issue of how the tariff for the media was calculated, we understand the international practice, but we also understand the Kenyan reality. For that purpose, we wanted to, with the media, we had less than 1% compliance.
Once again, let me just hold you on to that thought and cross over to Holy Family Basilica, where we are seeing the casket carrying the body of the late Ndingi Mwananzeki being removed from the vehicle, from the hearse, I should say, for that matter, being rolled into the carrier there, and I think it should be wheeled into the basilica. This is something which is indeed a matter of great interest for the country on this particular morning, where we're laying to rest an icon, a champion for justice, a man of the collar, someone who will be remembered for the deeds that he had, especially in terms of broadening Kenya's democratic space and giving a voice to the voiceless on critical issues of governance, critical issues of use of public funds, issues around the administration and general governance of the country, tackling corruption head-on. So this is something which definitely Kenyans do resonate with, and we're just here to see the final respects being given to the late Archbishop at the Holy Family Basilica, the clergy there trying to ensure that everything is in order. And of course, as you can see, everyone is trying to adhere to the guidelines issued by the state and by health professionals regarding the spread of COVID-19. We can see the gentlemen there are all in masks and, of course, trying to adhere to the distance despite the challenges that they're facing in terms of ensuring that there is no transmission should there be anyone there who is infected. So it's a challenging time, especially for those who have been bereaved, trying to see how to give the most decent and final respect to your family amidst the circumstances which really constrain the degree to which this can be done. The government recently gave a directive that it should be limited to close family and at least a maximum of 15 persons, which definitely does complicate this given the sort of societal norms that we have in the country in terms of final respects. So this is something, again, Kenyans will be eyeing just to see how it is handled in this situation of an icon who is being laid to rest, and to ensure that everything is adhered to in terms of not just the final respect, but also the health concerns that the country is facing at this particular juncture. Ndingi Mwananzeki passed on at the age of 89, and he was the former Catholic Archbishop of Nairobi, and this is something which many Kenyans will remember him in terms of his contribution to the country, contribution to democracy, contribution to the Word of God, especially for the Christian faith. And of course, coming at a time when the country is going through a very challenging moment, trying to combat the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic. Yesterday, we had President Uhuru Kenyatta giving even tighter measures in terms of restricted movement across the counties of Nairobi, Kwale, Kilifi, and Mombasa. And the country is trying to come to terms with this situation, and then, of course, we are befallen by this misfortune. There will be every intention to pay, and that's our reporter Kennedy Mureithi, paying his last respects to the former Archbishop. Certainly a blow to the country in terms of the loss of this sort of an icon at such a time when his guidance, of course, would be most needed to give confidence to this country, to encourage many, just to see how that goes on. So I was mentioning that the President, of course, has given a number of directives which we can see are being adhered to here in terms of everyone in a public space must be wearing a mask. And of course, this is based on consultations with health professionals, officials at the Ministry of Health, just to ensure that at least we curb the spread of the coronavirus pandemic, which as of yesterday, the country had confirmed that cumulatively 158 infections, which has been escalating ever since the country reported its first case on the 13th of March in 2020. That was a Friday when the president did announce that, or rather the president, the Ministry of Health did announce that that was the situation. So here we are in our moments of final respects to the late Ndingi Mwana Nzeki, someone who definitely will be remembered, especially in the 1990s, for having contributed greatly to this country and the agitation for widening of democratic space in Kenya. This is definitely an icon many Kenyans will remember and identify with in many respects, be it religious, be it in terms of civil liberties. And with these pictures will continue to remain on your screen even as we go back to our conversation where we were focusing on royalty payments. And the executive director of Kekobo, that is Bwana Edward Sigei, was with us, and he was commenting on the issues of royalty payments, as well as how the reviews of 2017 came about, international best practice versus the reality on the ground. Bwana Sigei, if we still have you on the line, you could just continue with your conversation.
All right, I was saying we are aware of the international practice. Then in Kenya, the media globally is the biggest contributor to the collective management organization's royalty kitty. Unfortunately, our compliance level was close to maybe 1 to 2%. So we had to take a reality check and be pragmatic in dealing with media owners. And this decision was made with a view to allow in between the tariff currency, while the current tariff is ongoing, we will hold engagements for the purposes of having the media to pay based on a percentage basis. So we are alive to the economic reality as well of most of the media stations. There are many of them are struggling. There will be a few that will be able to pay even as during this period that we are going through. So we are aware, and I think we've committed to work with the MOA and the users for the purposes of ensuring that everybody who is required to pay pays in the proper formula, and we have everybody is happy. We want to make our artists happy. But having said that, artists also need to understand that we have a problem that the media houses are playing a lot of foreign music, which would make our work in creating a compliance, high compliance levels would result in how CMOs repatriating most of the money. This is not the right thing to do, and that's why the 60% and more should really be enforced strictly, so that we don't collect money and send it abroad. So that is something that the Communications Authority, amongst others, have been working on. So I think the concern by Anto Neosol there is proper, and I think we are alive to it, and we are dealing with it. So for me, these issues have been ongoing. I think it's evolving, and we are alive to it. We want to engage everyone, but we are pragmatic in doing that. And one of the things that has also been created is that the user self-service system in the collection of royalties, so that we are over the period where people were the CMOs were being accused of harassing business people. And we've made the tariff so simple to understand that you don't need a licensing officer to come to your door for you to pay. So those are all the interventions. And if not for COVID will have an impact, a very big impact. If not for COVID, the CMOs would actually collect, in our estimation and projection, over 1.5 billion a year. So it's doable. And the barriers that we have removed were mainly the tariff barrier the payment barrier. So I would expect a good business for the CMOs going forward once we are done with the COVID-19.
Once again, before I bring in Antonio Sol in this conversation, you mentioned something around enforcement of the 60% ratio requirement, because for the benefit of the public understanding this, just speak more into this and what actually it will entail.
I think right now, as part of these measures that I mentioned, for the purpose of ensuring it's done, I think some proposal has been made that where a media house is not adhering to the 60 plus, they should pay a certain penalty that would go into developing the content, the local content of the quality and consistency that they want. Because one of the pushbacks from the media has always been that the quality and the amount of content is very low. So we are addressing that there's a policy that will probably be considered at cabinet level in due course. Is called the music policy. So it will be addressing mainly music, but it will have an impact also on film as well. So there are a number of measures, and secondly, the Communications Authority will now be checking on a quarterly basis this compliance and pushing people across the line. But thankfully, most of our major ones are close to that 60% level. But I think right now, probably the next discussion we should have is, should we go even beyond 70? And the artists have been asking about the rationale of the 60%, which is that the process has been, reaching 60% has been a graduated process. But now that we are approaching compliance with that, we need to move it up a little more, probably to 70, probably to 75%. So that is the next discussion that we are having with the artists community.
Yeah, before I bring in Antonio Sol, I should just mention that at Holy Family Basilica, you can see some cabinet secretaries arriving for this interment of the late Ndingi Mwananzeki. We have seen the Interior and Coordination Cabinet Secretary, that is Fred Matiang'i. We have seen the CS for Devolution, that is Eugene Wamalo, who has just arrived there. And of course, this is something which clearly the government is giving high priority as far as the order of events on the day is concerned. I want to get some thoughts from Antonio Sol on this subject of royalty, and especially the issue of a 60% requirement for local content, failure to which penalties, and he says, Edward Sigei says, heavy penalties should be imposed on those local stations which are flouting this. Anton, what do you think about this?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest issues with being able to attain the 60, and above, is obviously an issue of content. And I believe that we're at an interesting point in Kenya, and COVID really is, it's really, there's some words I can't use on air. So, but COVID has not shaken the spirit of Kenyan artists creating music, but you can definitely feel that Kenyan artists have been really working on great music. And I have to spotlight and give a shout out, for example, to Boomplay, who basically have a music app that caters to Kenyan artists all over Africa and in the world. And what they've done, for example, is that they've provided a $1 million fund to be able to have artists, pitch into the fund and get money, grants, actually, so grants, to be able to create content. Okay. Because, imagine having, talking about content, having 60% and above content, but you don't have actually the, radio play content.
Let me just hold you on to that thought. I'm told that